Let's go over a client protocol. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Celia Corbo. I am a functional health practitioner and licensed chiropractor. And today on this video, I want to go through a client's protocol in my functional health program, Heal Yourself. This program is either a 3-month program or 6-month program designed to take a deep dive into your body's biochemistry so we can understand exactly how you are operating to the genetic level and fix any deficiencies or corrections that we need to make in order for you to live a better quality of life. In particular, this client's protocol is what we call the foundations protocol. We'll be looking at 3 tests, one of which is blood work. The second is genetic testing, and the third is a metabolism and nutrition test called the OATS test or the organic acids test. All 3 of these tests are not looked at individually, but rather all together. And I'm going to show you exactly how in this video so we can understand the patient's deficiencies and where we need to correct their health in order for them to live a better quality of life. Having said that, please keep in mind that this video is solely for educational purposes. This video is not intended to diagnose or to educate you about your own body. We are just going over a client protocol. If you do have any questions about your health, please always consult with a medical practitioner or someone who's on your medical team so that you can get the answers that you need. Also, this video is not edited, and I just want to put that out there because if I do stumble or if I make any mistakes, we're just going to have to live with it and persevere through. So let's go. Let's get started. So this client is a diabetic. They have been seeing me a while for chiropractic care, but they have also gone to multiple practitioners in search of someone who can help them with diet and supplementation to help really regulate their blood sugar, because diabetes is an issue of the body where blood sugar is not regulated, but it can cause so many more symptoms as opposed to just blood sugar deregulation. So this particular patient was in search of someone to help with that, with blood sugar regulation, but was not really having any luck. So they found me and we put together this protocol that I'm about to go through with you all. And there are some really interesting things that are going on in this individual that I can't wait to disclose because it's so much more than just blood sugar dysregulation. Having said that, let's get started in our lab test analysis. So the first test that we're going to go through is the lab blood work. So this is a pretty familiar test for most people. Usually when you go to your traditional medical doctor or you go to your naturopath or your functional health practitioner, blood work is always something that's done maybe 9 out of 10 times. It's very rare if it's not. And we're going to start with that because it is very familiar with a lot of individuals. So I'm just going to share my screen so we can have some results on here. There we go. All right. And let's just open that up. Amazing. So this patient's blood work, we are going to be analyzing it through this Excel spreadsheet. And before we dive into the blood work, I want to bring to your attention these ranges. In traditional Western medicine, medical, we have normal ranges. These ranges can have quite a large number in between them. I've seen some ranges as big as 500 units. When I'm analyzing a patient's blood work, we are looking at the optimal ranges. So that window or that range between deficient and excessive is more narrow. And this is better, in my opinion, because it's not only telling us that they are normal and optimal if they fall within that range, but it also gives us less leeway. So we can really see what the patient's optimal values are from the blood work that we see in the results. These ranges are evidence-based. I did not make them up. They have been researched, and the research does tell us that these are very valid. And again, it's not a normal range, it's an optimal range. So what I did in this Excel spreadsheet was we have the results, you put them in, and then it tells us if that value is high or low. And because this patient is in Canada, we are looking at this second column, or column E. Let's dive into our metabolic panel. So this is testing everything from sugar to electrolytes to liver enzymes, things like that. And I'm only going to go over the ones that are high or low so we can get an understanding of them. And right off the bat, we can see that glucose is high at 9.6. In order for glucose to be normal, we want to see it at least 5 or below. Usually someone who's diabetic, it's above 7. And in this case, the patient is diabetic, so they are at a 9.6, and that falls way outside of our optimal range. So when glucose is high, it's telling us that we're having a blood sugar dysregulation issue and the body is not able to utilize that sugar for energy, and it's floating around in the body and it can wreak a lot of havoc if we don't get it under control. The second marker is chloride. This one isn't too far off from the ranges. It's at 107 and the upper limit of the optimal is at 106. But I still want to bring it to the patient's attention because even if we see something marked just 1 point higher than the functional optimal ranges, it still indicates that it can spiral out of control. And when it comes to chloride, it does indicate that we have high levels of acidity in the body. Usually cortisol is also really high, which is our stress hormone. And more likely than not, they are dehydrated. And chloride is something that we find in sodium chloride, which is salt. So they're probably lacking some sodium chloride. But again, in this case, we just want to see chloride. So that's what that indication of chloride tells us when it's high. Next, we have calcium. This individual has low calcium at 2.28, whereas we want it to be at least at 2.37. And the reason why we need calcium is not just for healthy bones. We need it for our nervous system. Every time you send a signal, your body through the nervous system, it utilizes calcium. Even your heart, every pump, every electrical signal that pumps the heart uses calcium. Again, if calcium is low, this can indicate issues with the nervous system, with the cardiovascular system, also with your thyroid, your metabolism, because it also helps with vitamin D absorption. So we really need to make sure that calcium is at optimal ranges in the body because so many systems rely on it. The next levels are these acronyms right here. So AST, ALT, and GGT. These are some really long biochemical names that I don't want you to worry about, but rather these three are liver enzymes. I do want you to know that. So these three liver enzymes tell us how hard or how well the liver is working. If they are within the functional normal ranges, your liver is fine. But in this patient's case, they're not. They're high, which is telling us that there is liver and cardiovascular function. It could also be medication use. It could be gut inflammation, viral infections, a vitamin E deficiency, or even alcoholism. It's something that we do want to address because the liver is the second largest organ. It's responsible for detoxification among many other functions. So we need to make sure that the liver is working optimally and we're keeping it within these functional optimal ranges. Next is our lipid panel. So in the lipid panel, we're going to be looking at cholesterol. We're going to be looking at triglycerides, which is a very fancy way of saying fat, and then HDL and LDL cholesterol, which I'll get into in just a second. But cholesterol overall, we need in the body. It's what we call a building block. We need it to make hormones such as estrogen and testosterone and progesterone, which those are called the sex hormones. And if we don't have enough cholesterol, then our endocrine system or our hormone system can be compromised. But if we have too much cholesterol, that can also be an indication of dysfunction. And in this patient's case, the cholesterol levels are too high. And that can indicate that there's a chronic infection, inflammation, low thyroid activity, possibly. There could also be cardiovascular dysfunction and liver dysfunction, which we did see just above in our metabolic panel. Could also be poor bile flow and poor metabolism of fats. So we really want to make sure that diet is in favor of a cholesterol reducing nature, because to go on a statin medication to help control cholesterol is not something that I usually recommend right off the bat. Especially if we can modify diet, I highly, highly recommend it, because statins in their own way can also wreak a lot of havoc. Two predominant symptoms are muscle cramps and mental dementia. So eventually. So we don't really want to go towards a statin immediately if we can correct this with a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle. Next is triglycerides. So it's that fat that I was talking about right before. Again, this patient is high in their triglycerides at 2.72, and the upper limit is 0.9. So they're quite high. And again, high levels do indicate blood sugar dysregulation, which is not really a surprise because this patient is diabetic. So they already have issues with regulating their blood sugar. It can also mean liver and cardiovascular dysfunction, poor bile flow. It could also indicate a possible H. pylori infestation, which is a bacteria that goes into the stomach and wreaks some havoc. Alcohol use, hypothyroidism. In this case, birth control, I'm not worried because this patient is male, but it could be many other things. Next, we have HDL and LDL cholesterol. HDL cholesterol stands for high density lipoprotein. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. These two versions of cholesterol are considered good and bad. The good version being the high density lipoprotein and the bad version being the low density lipoprotein. And in the presentation of this patient's blood work, it's not uncommon that HDL is lowered compared to LDL cholesterol. That is very common. I would like us to switch it because HDL should be higher than LDL. But again, it probably signifies that there's something possibly autoimmune going on. And we need to also help with bile flow. It means liver dysfunction, lack of exercise, hypothyroidism, heavy metals, and possibly oxidative stress. I want to go into a little bit about those symptoms that I just mentioned, one of which is bile flow. Underneath your liver, you have another organ called the gallbladder. And a lot of people actually get this removed, especially females over the age of 40. However, the gallbladder is so important because it helps to produce a substance called bile, B-I-L-E. Why we need bile is because when we eat something that's fatty, the bile will help emulsify it or break it down. And if you don't have bile in the body, then you're not going to break down fats very well. And you're probably going to have high triglycerides or possibly high cholesterol. So it's super important that we have bile. Now, there's a catch to bile. The bile is actually made from cholesterol. But the thing is in our bodies, we are trying to be as efficient as possible. So our body will actually recycle bile. We won't get rid of it. So taking something like psyllium husk fiber, another common psyllium husk brand is Metamucil, or anything that's just high in fiber, will bind to the bile and excrete it from the body. So your body will actually have to produce more bile instead of recycling it. And how it does that is from cholesterol. So a really natural way to lower your cholesterol and to increase HDL and lower LDL would be to consume more fiber. Give that a shot for like 3 months and then retest your blood levels and see what happens. That would be something I recommend to all of my clients who are in a high category of cholesterol and exactly presenting like this patient here. Go get your Metamucil or go get your psyllium husk fiber and drink that for 3 months and then retest your cholesterol levels. So we need bile, but we can also make it if we just know how to get rid of it. The second thing that I want to mention is oxidative stress. I want you to imagine just taking a bite out of an apple. And then when you bite through the skin, you see that white fleshy part of the apple. Now leave the apple on the counter and come back an hour later, and you'll notice that that white flesh has now turned brown. That's what we call oxidation. It's when a substance interacts with oxygen and it oxidizes, and it basically, I don't want to say goes bad, but the apple eventually goes mushy. You're like, nah, I don't want to eat this anymore. It's same thing with a car. It rusts. That's oxidation. As humans, we require oxygen to survive. So we are exposing our body and our biochemistry to oxygen and possibly oxidation every single day. But we don't want it to be something that is a stressful process in the body. We do not want to undergo a lot of oxidation. But if we have high LDL levels, we are possibly exposing our body to higher levels of oxidation, which can be a detriment later on in life. So that's another reason why we want to lower those LDL values and just cholesterol overall and get it within that functional optimal range. Next is our complete blood count. So with this, we're looking at white blood cells and red blood cells, and we can see in this patient that there are some values that, again, are in the low and high category. The first one being white blood cells. White blood cells are part of our immune system, and they are going to fight any kind of bacteria or virus that enters into the body. So we need to make sure that the white blood cells are within those functional optimal ranges. In this case, it's not. So what that could mean for someone is that there could be a chronic infection. There could be pancreatic insufficiency, which is very common in diabetics because they're not able to produce insulin, which comes from the pancreas. There could be autoimmune disorders, reduced bone marrow production, and possibly this person is on a raw food diet. So those are some of the reasons why white blood cells can be low. Red blood cells are responsible for carrying oxygen to and from many different organs and systems in the body and removing carbon dioxide. We need that gas exchange to take place in order to survive. And in this case, the patient has too much red blood cells. Sometimes too much of a good thing can still not be good. So this patient is at 5.6, and we want to be highest at a 4.9. Again, a high level can indicate dehydration or respiratory functions and disorders, so we want to keep an eye on that and lower it. Now, the next is MCV. This is the mean corpuscular volume of the red blood cell, and it's low. So when it's low, it usually indicates that there is an iron deficiency or a B6 deficiency. And iron, which I'll get to in just a second, is very important because we need it to bind to oxygen in order to transport oxygen throughout our body. And if we have a low MCV, then we're not having enough of an iron binding potential so that oxygen can travel throughout the body. Next is the RDW. So this is the red cell width, or how big the cell is, and it's too big. Right now it's at 13%, well, 13.2, and it is, you could say, right at the upper limit if you wouldn't look at the decimal point. But because it is a decimal point, 13.2, I want us to pay attention to that, because when red blood cells get too big, they're not sufficient in how they're transporting oxygen throughout the body. So even though it's not a super high marker, I'm still going to keep my eye on it. Now going into the iron panels, this correlates very well with the blood cell panel that we just looked at. And the first marker we're going to look at is the iron serum. This is low, so it's at a 12, and we want it to at least be at a 15. And when it's low, it indicates that this individual does not have enough iron in the body. So we call this anemia. This is quite rare to see in a male, more common in females as we do menstruate every month. However, it doesn't mean that it can't happen in a male, and it is happening in this case. So in this case, we are probably lacking some red meat in the diet, and that's usually one of the cases that there's an iron deficiency. Next, we have TIBC, which is total iron binding capacity. What this means is how much iron can bind onto a red blood cell. And it's high, meaning that there's a lot of potential for iron to bind, but it's not taking advantage of that potential. So we have a lot of empty spots. And iron saturation essentially is, again, how saturated is that iron capacity. So TIBC is kind of like the taxi. It's gonna take oxygen on that iron binding site, travel it around. But in this case, there's too many open spots. Iron saturation is low. That's why there's too many open spots. So we have to increase the iron level. And finally, ferritin. So ferritin is your body's ability to store iron. So we need it for the commuting of oxygen, but we also want to store it. And you don't want to store too much, but we do need some storage of iron just in case. And in this patient's situation, it's at a 60 and we want it to be at least at a 90. So we do need to increase the iron potential through diet. And one of the most wonderful ways to do that is eating grass-fed beef liver. Now, I highly recommend whenever you are getting any poultry or meat products to always go to a farm or to a butcher that practices good husbandry and ethical slaughter of animals, because it does make a huge difference, not only in the taste, but in the quality and also in the health of that animal as we're eating it. So that's something that we really need to pay attention to, especially when we're rocking these really low levels of ferritin. Next is the thyroid. Thyroid is huge. And I feel that in this day and age, the thyroid gets blamed for a lot. You know, it's a really important structure. It's a really important system when it comes to overall body function. It's responsible for your metabolism, how you feel, brain fog, constipation, hair loss, lethargy, fatigue. These are all things that can be a symptom of the thyroid. And in this patient's case, we do have a thyroid issue. It's quite unique, the presentation that I'm seeing, because TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone found in the brain, is usually high when we see the T4 and the T3 as low. So this doesn't necessarily indicate to me that we're a full out hypothyroid patient if I were just looking at TSH. However, we're pretty darn close. So what we need to do is we need to keep an eye on our thyroid and we need to support the thyroid through iodine and selenium. Now, when we have T4 and T3 low, the body will sense that these levels are low and will signal to the brain to make more of it. That signaling and that more production hasn't happened yet, but it's not far off from happening. And that's when we run into problems of excessive amounts of thyroid hormones circulating in the body, but nothing's actually happening. I want to touch on T3 before I get into reverse T3, because the thyroid is very specific in how it operates. T3 is the active hormone that turns the metabolism on. However, if we see that the individual is high in reverse T3, it tells us that the body's actually turning the T3 off. So I want you to imagine a lock and key. Your metabolism is the lock and T3 is the key. In a normal situation, the T3 will bind onto the metabolism and it will unlock it, and then a series of chemical reactions happens to trigger your metabolism. But when we have reverse T3 bind on to the metabolism lock, it doesn't unlock it, but it just takes up a spot. And that is not a good thing, because if we are taking up a spot on a metabolism receptor and not activating the metabolism, then we are going to run into that hypothyroid presentation. Cold limbs, like cold fingers and toes. We're going to be experiencing hair loss. We experience elevated cortisol levels. We experience excessive weight gain, constipation, brain fog. Those are the types of symptoms that we see with hypo or an underactive thyroid. And it can be because the body is turning off your T3. This marker, reverse T3, is something that I specifically send my patients for the requisition, and we want it to be below 15. And right now it's not. So if it's too high, it means that the body is undergoing too much stress, too much trauma, and we need to do some mindfulness work. Next is the TPO antibody. And again, this is high. So it is indicating to me that there is the possible start of an autoimmune condition with the thyroid, which is not very good because whenever we have an autoimmune condition, the body is now attacking itself because it sees it as a foreigner. Right now, it hasn't reached too high of a level yet, but if we let it get out of control, the body will start to see itself as a foreigner and it's going to start attacking itself. So that's not very good. And then finally, these are our additional markers. So I like looking at vitamin D, homocysteine, and B12. And for vitamin D, this is actually not a vitamin, it is a hormone. And vitamin D is super important with cellular division and cellular replication. The rate at which your cells divide is very important because you want to make sure it's not going too fast where it makes mistakes. And you also want to make sure that your cells are dividing and understanding what they're dividing to become. So you don't want a stomach cell to get confused and be like, wait, am I supposed to be a skin cell? That's how cancer starts. So we don't want that to happen. That's why vitamin D is so, so, so important. And being in Canada, you have to pay for this test because they were realizing that so many people who were getting their vitamin D checked were deficient. And that's simply because we don't see the sun for at least half of the year. So even if you do live in a very sunny environment, or if you live in Canada and you're like, oh, but summertime, I still recommend supplementing with vitamin D, at least 1,000 international units a day, or whatever your medical doctor or functional doctor has told you to supplement with, given that they know your blood work levels, because it is such an important hormone. Next, we have homocysteine. Again, this is another test that I send my patients for that not many people do until there's a serious problem. If we have high levels of homocysteine, that can lead to a possible stroke. It can lead to peripheral vascular disease, which is basically a circulatory issue throughout the body and the arms or the legs, and coronary artery disease. These are the arteries within the heart itself that can become diseased. We don't want that to happen. And we also don't want this level to be too low because it can trigger a genetic mutation to become active and produce a lot of neurotoxic ammonia. Now, this patient is very fortunate in that they fall within the normal ranges of 6.6, and that that genetic mutation is not active because they do have it. But excuse me, we want to make sure it does not get higher and it does not get lower. I really like this value for them. And then finally, B12. B12 is my favorite and, in my opinion, the most important B vitamin because it is responsible for two major processes in the body. Number one, methylation. This is an extremely intricate and important biochemical reaction that helps with DNA synthesis, and it also helps with neurotransmitter production, which are the chemicals of the nervous system. So we need to make sure that we are supplementing with the correct vitamin B12. And it's also really important for your nerve cell health. Around your nerve cells, you have little areas of fat that if we start to lose them, it can affect the way our body and our brain talk to each other. We need those little areas of fat so that signals can remain strong and powerful until they reach their end destination. But if we start to lose that fat, which is called myelin, we can end up with something called multiple sclerosis. So vitamin B12 is extremely, extremely important. So that is this patient's blood work. And now we're going to take a look at their genetics test. I'm just going to stop sharing and then reshare my screen here. So this is the protocol that I usually put together for someone because to go through all of that is going to be quite a bit of work. And we go over their food journals and genetics and the organic acids test and then their blood analysis. So I did put together the genetics test here. And you might look at this and be like, what does all of this coding mean? I'm not going to get so deep into it, but I do want to share a few of the genes that I look at. The first being anything with CYP in front of it. So when I see a CYP gene showing up on my genetics sheet, I'm like, oh, there's a problem with the liver. Because CYP is phase 1 detoxification, which takes place in the liver. And if we have any mutations in them, in those genes, it leads to a problem with detox. And in this patient particular, they have a reduced ability to metabolize NSAIDs, so something like Advil, which an NSAID stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, aspirin, Coumadin, phenytoin, and sulfonylureas. Pardon my pronunciation. GSTP1 is another gene, but the one that I want to focus on is the COMT. So this individual has a COMT plus plus mutation. So when we're looking at genetics, you can either be minus minus, meaning there's no mutation. You could be plus minus, meaning you have one mutation, or you could be plus plus, which means you have a two mutation, which is a double mutation, and it's a full mutation. And this patient has a COMT plus plus. They have a really difficult time with dopamine. And this individual in particular cannot handle anything that is methylated. So there are different forms of B12 on the market, as an example, and one of them is called methylcobalamin. This would not work for this patient because they are COMT plus plus, and taking methylcobalamin is going to pretty much make them go manic or create some other type of symptom that they won't really know where it's coming from, because it's coming from their supplement, which is something that they are taking to help them. So they don't usually correlate those two things together. So we do not recommend methyl anything for this patient. We also have a CBS mutation, which is another mutation in that methylation pathway that I described earlier with B12. And then we have this MTHFR. Now, MTHFR is a super popular gene these days, and it's getting a lot of hype. I don't really know why. Like, I understand why it is super important, but genes don't work alone. They work with other genes. And if one gene is affected in something, it will possibly affect the function of another gene. So MTHFR, specifically in this version, this individual will be producing a lot of neurotoxic ammonia. So we want to mitigate that, and we want to control that through diet. The other gene that I want to bring to your attention before I jump into our organic acids test, because this can be very complicated and maybe not so interesting for some, but this is the VDR-TAC gene. This indicates if we see a mutation, a double plus plus mutation, this individual has a really difficult time absorbing vitamin D into their cells and using it. So in this case, the patient has a very low vitamin D level. Not only would they have to increase their vitamin D, but they would have to aid the absorption of vitamin D so that their body can actually use it. Do you see how important it is knowing the genetics of somebody and correlating it with the blood work and the organic acid test, which I'll get to next? Like, this stuff is so, so, so important. And looking at it at this level really allows us to understand this person's genetic blueprint, their DNA, which is so unique to every single person and really tailors their protocol to fix their deficiencies. And that's exactly what we're looking at when we're looking at all of these markers. So that's something that I wanted to bring to your attention about the genetics portion, is that there are specific genes that I'm looking at. I do look at more genes than just the COMT, MTHFR, VDR-TAC. I look at way more genes than just those ones, but I want to show you the importance of those genes and how they correlate with other things, which I'm going to get to next, but also that I just showed you in the blood work. So let's go into our, here it is. So let's go into our organic acids test. So the organic acids test is a nutrition and metabolism test that I absolutely love. And we see all of these markers, and this is page 1. And this is usually where a lot of practitioners stop, because they're just looking at mold and yeast and bacteria. But this test is so rich in information, not only about mold and yeast and bacteria, but about how your body is working in general. And we can see right off the bat, like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we have some high markers in a lot of these categories, specifically at the top. So this patient is dealing with some mold and some yeast in their environment. And I highly recommend that they get that ERMI test to really see where it's coming from. It could come from your work office, your home, your car, anywhere that you spend a lot of time, you can be getting mold into your body, and mold is so toxic. It's not just something fuzzy that grows on your food if you leave it too long in the fridge. It is so, so, so toxic. And with this particular patient, I would really like to see if that is the case. The next page that we're going to look at, bear with me as I find it, is this page 2. There's nothing on here with any kind of lab diagnostics, but this just shows you something in the body called the Krebs cycle. This cycle is found in the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of the cell. If you ever took biology, you might have heard that term before, but it's responsible for producing something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And this is super important because ATP is energy. And we want to see how this Krebs cycle is working in order to understand any deficiencies that we'll see in the next page and to make sure it's working properly. I also just want to show you at the bottom here that we have these dopamine pathways we have this pathway that produces dopamine, and we have B6, we have vitamin C, we have S-adenosylmethionine, which is also called SAMe, and we have COMT. Did we not just go over that in our genetics? So we need to make sure that this is working. So this is why I look at everything, because it is so important to correlate as opposed to segmentally compartmentalize. Your body is an amazing, amazing machine, an amazing system. And if you just look at it one thing at a time, you're really doing yourself a huge disservice. So that's the second page there. Now, on the third page, we're looking at oxalate metabolites, which this glyceric has to do with blood sugar, and it's pretty high. So again, not a surprise, they have diabetes. But we're also seeing oxalic, which has to do with oxalates. And again, this is how their body's getting rid of stuff. So we see that there is quite a high amount of oxalates, but I don't necessarily like to say that this is accurate. So in every single protocol, I say reduce your oxalates. And if you want, if you go on drceliacorbo.ca, you can actually download the oxalate handbook, where it gives you a list of foods that are high in oxalates that you should be avoiding, because oxalates are super detrimental. They cause so much havoc. And I'm so sorry, but if you are a vegan or a vegetarian watching this episode right now, if you're just doing it for dietary reasons because you think it's healthier, please stop. You are flooding your body with oxalates, because oxalates are a plant's natural defense mechanism. A plant cannot punch you, kick you. I mean, it could eat you if it's a Venus flytrap, but really, chemically is how it protects itself. And when you eat anything high in oxalates, like spinach or almonds or beets, as an example, those oxalates bind with calcium, and they form these razor sharp crystals that deposit themselves into your joints. They can cause kidney stones, gout, brain fog, depression, migraines, headaches, GI issues, like you name it. Oxalates are probably at the root cause of that. So do yourself a favor and go on drceliacorbo.ca and download that oxalate handbook to just even get started. But I will warn you, when you are reducing your oxalate load, you might go into a bit of a detox period and you might not feel so good. So go slow. So that's that. The next one, glycolytic and mitochondrial again. This is telling me how the mitochondria are functioning, which I just mentioned is the powerhouse of the cell. And this patient's mitochondria are not doing really good. So we need to support those mitochondria like ASAP. Carbohydrates are not the way that the body, or for this particular patient, likes to use for energy. So we are dropping the carbohydrates, and we are going to limit the fats, and we are going to look at increasing the protein. But again, we can't stop eating because the mitochondria can't handle these macronutrients, but we have to support the mitochondria in their function. And then finally, on this page, the end of page 3, we have neurotransmitter metabolites. And this is where we actually correlate more intensely the genetics to the metabolism of the neurotransmitters. And this particular patient, they didn't have a gene on their their report, which is the monoamine oxidase, or MAOA, and that tells me about serotonin. And serotonin is the feel-good hormone. But I can already tell you just by looking at this that it's not working properly, that gene. So it's either mutated or it's not getting expressed. And we need to help with serotonin regulation, because serotonin regulation can cause depression. And usually people who are depressed, they go on the medication called an SSRI, which is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So basically, your body with this medication is inhibiting the uptake of serotonin. So we want it to last longer in the body. With medication, though, I don't love that because it promotes a dependency, and a lot of my patients that are on SSRIs, which are antidepressants, they feel like zombies. They feel numb. They just don't have really any kind of emotional awareness, and it's truly quite sad. Again, I'm not going to downplay the medical world. Some things work for others and some things don't work for others, but again, like if we can get all of this to function, the body, I mean, to function more naturally, like, whew, you are doing yourself such a service, because who wants to be on medication for the rest of their life? I definitely don't want to be. And mind you, I do want to add, let me just find the fourth page there, that supplementation to fix all of these deficiencies in this patient's protocol is not something for forever. It's something to fix the deficiencies, and then we just get you on a basic nutrient protocol. Taking all of these supplements that I would suggest to this patient is going to be a ton of supplements every single day, and also a ton of money. And again, that's one of the things with supplements, because they're so available on our shelves. It's almost like you can just take them out like candy and give it a try. I don't love that. It's so cringy to me, because these supplements are actually so powerful if taken correctly and in the correct form for the body. So they're not candy. Don't just pull them off the shelves. Do a protocol for yourself and figure out which supplement you need. And that's going to be the best way to understand your body. Moving on. Next, we're looking at the pyrimidine folate. So this is really good. Everything's in the middle. And then we have our ketone fatty acid oxidation. Again, super high. I would not recommend ketosis as a diet for this individual, because they cannot handle it. They are going to be hurting their bodies if they were to go on a keto diet. Like, it would just not be fun. So there is that. And then we look at the standard nutritional markers like the B12, the B6, the B5, the B2, the vitamin C, the CoQ10, all these things. And again, we're looking at what they need more of, and then we are supplementing with that. And finally, I think that's it. The last one, no, hold on one second. There is one more sheet, but it's not showing up. But anyways, what it is, I'm just going to stop sharing. One of the last markers, which I forgot to screenshot, and the reason I screenshotted it was because I just don't want my patient's information to be out in the world on a name basis. But one of the final screenshots was about the vitamin D. Just found it. Let's share screen. Share. Here it is. Okay. So this is the last page. There we go. Took me a little while. But we can see here, again, some high markers. So this indicates detoxification, which is not very good. We have high amounts of toxic exposure, which, again, could be mold. And then we have our amino acid metabolites, which we need to regulate a little bit more. And then at the bottom, we have phosphoric. This relates to vitamin D. Surprise, surprise, this patient is low in their blood work and has a genetic mutation where they cannot uptake vitamin D very well. So it's not surprised to see, I'm not surprised to see that this is low. So that is a patient's protocol. And then what I would do upon reading and looking at all of that is then develop a supplementation list, the appropriate food plan diet for them to follow in order for us to see these long lasting changes that are not only going to get the patient to feel better, but really improve their quality of life. And really, for anyone, I know this patient in particular is a diabetic looking to regulate blood sugar, but I hope you can appreciate that there's so much more going on than just diabetes and blood sugar dysregulation. And this goes for everyone, whether you're trying to lose weight, whether you're trying to understand why you have so much brain fog, whether you have no energy when you get bloated after every single meal. These are just examples, but this protocol really dives deep into what we need to fix in the body and how to fix it naturally. Unfortunately, when it comes to curing the body of anything and you think it's going to take a short while, that's not the way that it's going to be cured. You need to go through the process. There is no shortcut when it comes to healing, which is truly unfortunate, but it is the truth. And I even know that from my own personal experience. But it does take a long time for your body to not only understand these changes, but also to develop new habits and to really understand how all of these new healthy lifestyle changes are to optimize its function. So I hope you understood this protocol. I hope you enjoyed this protocol. If you have any questions about the protocol or whether you would even like to do a protocol for yourself, you can always email me at celia.corbo28. I'll put the link below, 28@gmail.com. Again, I'll put the link below just so if you missed that. And yeah, and then we can do a protocol for you. We can see what's going on. You can also go to my website, www.drceliacorbo.ca, to learn more about the different programs that I have so you can understand and pick which one is best for you. I hope you enjoyed this protocol analysis. I'll see you at the next episode.